welcome to IA Simplified. IA Simplified stands for Intelligent Automation Simplified, and it's an RPA Jargon Busters podcast series where we showcase industry experts and we talk about intelligent automation, its impact on SME and mid-market financial services, healthcare, and other related fields. I'm your host, Tolani Jayatikolo, and on today's episode, our topic of discussion will be leveraging AI within small and medium enterprises, particularly around the marketing function. I think that it's the holy grail. So it's a good conversation we need to have once in a while. And I'm joined by Katie King. Katie is an expert. She's an AI expert, and she has a whole lot of experience, as a published author and as a business transformation consultant with a career spanning over 30 years. So insightful kind of watching Katie release, one of those books here and there. But we will be talking about the book as part of this segment as well. But Katie, welcome to IA Simplified, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, Talani. It's great to be here.
Interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know everyone's in the Katie King on LinkedIn, but we really want to know what makes you tick.
Okay, great question. So I'm 55. I'm a mum of two, and I've spent, as you said, a whole career, a whole 30 or more years in really the marketing space, helping organizations to get their go-to-market strategy right, to raise their profile, manage their reputations. What makes me tick really is helping people find their purpose, helping them achieve a goal that maybe they previously found really tricky and difficult, and keeping innovating. What makes me tick, and you've seen this with both the books, is keep reinventing myself. And like I say to everybody, we are all on a journey of continuous learning, and I certainly am, still, even at my ripe old age.
I love that. I love that. And just talking about the book, you've written two books. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the first book you wrote was, using AI. AI stands for artificial intelligence in marketing, and you wrote that about 20. I think it's almost 3 years ago now. 2019, and it's been a great success. And you authored another book earlier on this year, and that was AI strategy. And it's also been a success as well. But I really want to know, where does your inspiration come from?
Right back as a child, I'm an only child. I grew up in Tottenham in North London in a very working class sort of environment on the 11th floor of an apartment block. A council block, I should add, not a flash apartment. And my dad, I'm an only child. My dad took me to swap shops when you'd swap your books. So from day one, I loved books. And I'm still inspired today by great books, whether it's on Kindle, Audible, or in a physical. I still love hard copies. So books and a curious mind has always been what I'm about. And as my career's progressed and I've needed to do my own marketing, I've realized just how important it is to sort of try and stay ahead. So it's come from that, really, wanting to tap into the great brains all over the world and come up with my own piece of intellectual property that will future-proof me for each time a couple of years.
Interesting. I must say the AI in marketing is a rare piece. I read it myself. I've read it on Kindle. As you guys know, I'm not really much of a big fan of the paper book, which I love, but nowadays it's just very difficult to keep a lot of paper books. But something about the AI in marketing that I think I saw online was something. It became a resource, and it shows how successful it's been. It became a resource in the I think World Economic Forum. They did have something around empowering AI leadership toolkit for corporate brands. So it became a resource in the brand strategy. And it was quite interesting. I think at that point, that must have been a haha moment for you. Like, I have made it with this book. When did you feel that, that feeling that this book is different than what you've written? Like, this book is different from your usual self.
Good question. Once I was given access to some of the people that I didn't think before I'd written a book I would get access to. Once I'd had that interview with them, and typically it would be like an hour long Teams meeting or Zoom, and you'd be on that meeting thinking, wow, these people are incredible. And so the book's a collection of case studies of all these incredible brains all over the world, established brands, startups, tech experts, management consultants. And I think that collection of incredible material, I knew, I'd have to do something pretty bad to not make that a success. And within that, I build into it my own methodologies and my own scorecard, which has gone down really well. So, yeah, I think that was it really. Access. And I'm tenacious and I made sure I got that access. I was determined. But yeah, I think that was really the turning point, getting that access.
There was something you mentioned like quite a few times. If I can count the number of times, I probably get a cent for every time I counted it in the book. There's something about AI. AI. It's been in the media outlets. The way it's been portrayed is bit. It's I think it's a bit funny. And you mentioned that AI is sort of in the paranoia phase, and everyone's worried about AI. And I think I caught you. There was one of your interviews. I think the one in UAE. There was a conference, and you mentioned that as well. Like AI is in the paranoia phase, and you kind of buttressed your point with a few examples. There was one from late Stephen Hawking as well, which is a theoretical physicist, and he did mention. I think it was years ago. He's late now, so he mentioned AI could spell the end of the human race, and you also talked about Gartner hype cycle for emerging technologies, and how AI was being portrayed. Why do you think it's difficult for enterprises, particularly small enterprises, to really talk about AI and its benefit?
That's a really, really deep question. That quote that you talk about sort of embodies that paranoia stage. That's where a lot of people's introduction a few years back to AI came about. And when you look at you've got that trigger of innovation in the Gartner hype cycle, then you've got what they call the peak of paranoia and expectation. And that's where we were at. And so what we lacked, and this is where the enterprises have struggled because people are saying, well, is it being deployed at scale? Where are the case studies of successes and failures, and who do we turn to, and so on? And because the media, for example, and I don't just mean the Sun, I mean AI journals, um, retail journals, legal journals, because they lacked that data and those case studies, they had to turn to filling their pages, with, I guess, typically hype, and making things up or making it very far fetched. And so I think that sort of often it was about super intelligence and, all of that rather than here's a marketing tool that can help you understand how to get really hyper personalized about your customer. You don't have to treat them in a very homogenous way. Get really granular, give them what they need, don't second guess how you sell, those kinds of things. So AI hasn't reached that level of hyper intelligence. Let's hope it never ever does. But I think increasingly they understand it better. And that's a year or so ago. It was a bit more relevant when that book first came out, but I think we have moved on a little bit since then. But still, it's hard for people to know who to turn to because it's a wild west of multiple thousands of vendors out there.
Well, I felt that COVID really gave us that push we needed, right? In terms of the using AI, automation, and some of these technologies, and I think one thing I saw quite often was chatbot. A lot of the service providers were turning to chatbots to deal with volumes like queries and all that, because I think there was a lot of panic, I must say, during COVID. What do you think about that? Like, what's your take on AI kind of shaping, the human kind of relationship?
Agree. So your point about COVID accelerating that digitization is very valid. That doesn't necessarily mean it's sped up AI acceptance, but without that data, which digital platforms give you. And we've all had to be on digital platforms like this and Zoom and so on in order to survive during lockdown. So the digitization is a fundamental phase before we then, have AI, because we need the data for it. And so you've got these chatbots. Let's say you're an airline or you're a bank. And I talk in the book about Saxo Bank. What the chatbots can do is you can train them with your best people, and then they can handle typically 85% of routine inquiries. And you can then escalate the more complex inquiries to a human agent. So, man and machine, the chatbot as a facet within this family of artificial intelligence, data science. But what often happens, and it certainly was happening a few years ago, is that organizations like Saxo Bank failed to communicate effectively with all their different stakeholders. So they didn't train their staff and let them understand this isn't going to take all of your jobs away. And sometimes they're quite gimmicky. I've been on the exhibition floor with Pepper, walking around, the robot walking around, and other, for example, some of the banks chat box virtually on websites, and they're really poor. They can't seem to handle the complexity that we need them to. So I think they've moved on, and they're certainly being used in many, many different ways, but they're not there yet. There's work still to be done. I get really annoyed with them when I deal with my banks one, because it's a complete waste of time. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done on some of them, but certainly in a call center environment, they are really, making huge waves.
Point. But just looking at that, chatbot being an example of one of the AI technologies being employed worldwide. But are you seeing other, AI technologies being used that could really gain adoption?
Yeah, definitely. So you've got natural language processing and machine learning. You've got tools that are, for example, in public relations, an important part of the marketing mix of marketing, the the ability to do the publicity piece. You've got tools like Jasper and Concured, and others, and Phrasey. So they're helping organizations to, and with GPT-3 it's going to be even better, but to create content, to draft incredibly accurate content with great sources. So to sort of pull that together, and then maybe the professional PR consultant or marketing consultant comes in and tops and tails and makes it even more strategic and adds their creativity to it. So I talk in the first book, about the dirty, dull, and dangerous. About that mundanity, and I think the AI is. In brand watch, for example, is going out there and helping brands manage their reputation by tracking how they're being perceived across all the different channels that they're on. So our human brains are so powerful, but they can't cope with hundreds of languages at any one time and billions of bits of different data points. Spotting anomalies, in a bank, someone fraudulently using your card. So spotting an anomaly of a pattern of the way you typically behave. So it's those kinds of things that I would point to.
Talked about marketing. The book wasn't just for other people watching. It wasn't just applicable to marketing. It was applicable to sales and all the, HR and all the departments as well. And some of the stories there, there were, some of the stories from big brands talking about, AI success and, not so successful stories as well. And I think one of the things that there was one, I think, company that was quoted. I think it was a public relations company. I think it was called Omicron Public Relations Group or something of that sort. I can't remember
That's
the
correct.
name. Yeah, and they were talking about how AI is kind of preferring solutions within the pure sector. Could you touch on that a little bit and give
Mm,
us a bit of insight?
definitely. So in PR, you've got the media aspects of it. You've got reputation management. So, like I said, Brandwatch is helping, a tool that's helping PR agencies manage their clients' reputation. You've got media agencies. So you've got the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, and people like that who are using the AI to generate great content. You've got tools, like I said, like Jasper, and others that are actually writing the content. You've got that whole gamut. Even a simple tool like Otter AI is helping the PR agents to manage the meetings and to take a 1 hour Zoom meeting and convert the speech into text and to give you an accurate reading. And for me, when I was writing the first book, and writing and journalism are a big part of PR, that would have been so useful with book one, but I had to be very, very manual. So those are some of the things I mean. So taking content and giving it actually a very human tone and making it super relevant to many, many different personas. And that's the paradox in book one, the paradox of personalization, because we're all thinking it's dehumanized because it's this artificial intelligence. And what I like to talk about is augmented intelligence. And actually, journalists like you, or podcaster, author like me, barrister, infused with AI, we're even better at doing our jobs. So that's really what we're talking about.
I don't know if you've used this tool. This is something I use quite often. Is Grammarly.
Yes,
Yeah, do you use Grammarly?
I've
That's
used
right,
it.
with
Yeah.
something called I might go a bit technical on you now, right? There's something about I'm trying to remember the name, but it tells things like emotions. It's a branch of AI that tells things about emotions, and that's
Is this
something
the
that
sentiment analysis side
it
of
is.
it?
It
Probably.
is.
Yeah. Hmm.
Now you're more technical than I am. Congratulations. So it is sentiment analysis, and this tells emotions. No, things like you
Correct. Yeah.
use that for social media, and this will tell you emotions and how people are reacting to your brand. Grammy tries to embody that by showing how your text might be perceived,
Yes.
whether it's you're confident or whether it's a bit weak in terms of it's passive aggressive or something of that sort.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting, when you look at such a tool like Grammarly, and you're beginning to see other tools. I think there's Syntergia or something like that. I can't remember the names. I'm bad with names. It's an AI tool that I think got a lot of PR last year, right? And that was because it did look like a human. They created like a virtual image, and people were using that and feeding it different text. So
Hmm.
some companies were actually using that to make it a bit personalized, just in terms of their message and all that. So it was something out there, but I feel that AI doesn't necessarily have to be complex, just in the turn in the way it's a lot of people always think that AI must be complex for it to be used. But just looking at that two examples, just in terms of that, what would be your kind of advice for SMEs, especially thinking about or scared of putting so much money into AI? And what would be like your one, two, or crawl before you walk kind of advice?
Yeah. I would point people to my scorecard. They don't have to buy the book to see it. It's on my website, aiinbusiness.co.uk. And it's a brilliant scorecard. How do you get started? And to your point, there, it doesn't have to be complex. And you need to think before you get started, what is it you're trying to achieve? Because otherwise, you could waste money, even if it's a small amount of money. We don't want to waste money. So, what problem might AI solve? So come up with that objective. But I think really I would say, go out there, do a little bit of due diligence, have a watching brief. What's happening? Who's the competition? What tools are they using? What progress are they making? So to start with, it's about a new behavior and having a watching brief on your sector and your competition, and then do a small proof of concept. Go out there and trial a few of the products on the market. It might be Phrasey or Concurred or Jasper or even Otter AI, like I mentioned. So I know that's not a simple sort of one-off line, but think simply, do some small iterations, and regularly keep up to speed because things change very quickly.
I love that. I think I'm just gonna. There's been a bit of things you said there. I'm gonna piggyback on a few things you talked about: due diligence, experimentation as well. But in as much as we are looking at technology, it's not just the old change management, right? How do small businesses actually communicate this vision, to their other employees, for example, like telling them, for example, we will be using AI to perform X and X. How do they feel confident that AI isn't, let's say, replacing their jobs
Mm.
or taking, a lot of the responsibilities they would have been paid for to do?
Yeah. Start it's education and very clear, strong communications. So what the company mustn't do is just keep trying loads of things, wasting money. So it needs by having its clear strategy and iterating and starting small, it's gonna, be credible, and that's important. But then it's got to communicate either through a town hall, stand up, everybody on board, educating staff that this technology is here to stay. It's not a fad. It isn't going to be taking away your jobs. But if we don't upskill, and that will help you, Mr. Individual or Mrs. Individual, but if we don't, as a company, upskill and offer our customers better customer service and products and services, as a result of AI, we will get left behind. So I think it's being quite strong that this is imperative. That's A. B, that it's not scary. And C, they will actually probably enjoy it. And in so doing, future proof themselves for their own careers.
You've described it. You're very good at explaining so many things, Katie. I give it up to you for
Thank
that.
you.
There's another example I read in one of your interviews. I think you gave a couple of examples, but there was one that was really interesting was the Starbucks example, and the I think it was the Foot Asylum as well. I know they're brands in the UK, and I know you gave example of how they were using AI to drive customer experience. And I think what I want to get out of this is really to bring, it's not just marketing, but just through customer experience, how can AI kind of refine customer experience?
Yeah, definitely. So, Foot Asylum, as you say, use an AI tool called Peak, and it's about understanding customers, giving them a better experience. So, it's giving very targeted, very hyper personalized marketing comms. So, it's pushing only very relevant product recommendations based on what that customer's been doing, what their activity is. You could sort of argue in a similar vein, Starbucks and other brands are through their loyalty, through their rewards programs, bearing in mind the customer must give consent for this. So they're voluntarily opting into these programs. So this loyalty card and this mobile app is collecting all of this great data, meaning the brand can personalize their experience, personalize their marketing preferences, only give them recommendations when they're approaching that cafe, for example, in a certain geographic area. And I think as well of TGI Fridays or a bank that used to treat me, for example, as a big homogenous female 40 to 55, now they can get really specific and say Katie comes into our coffee shop or our restaurant twice a week. She orders a vanilla latte. Her husband's vegan. Whatever it might be, where AI can make us really personalized, give better service, engage loyally, not give us things. I get regularly lobbied by Ancestry. Do I want to buy the product? I've had it for about 5 years. It's really annoying. It's like, why do you keep trying to resell to me something I've already got that I'm actively using? So, you know, companies let themselves down by not using the tools that are out there on the market to retain their customers and grow by targeting personas of the customers they've already got.
That was great. And I think this kind of leads us to another area, another segment. This is about trust, fairness, and ethics. And I think some of the conversations you've just had now with me will kind of transition us to that point. And you talked briefly about personification. I think the earliest example I can think of is I've never said no as much as I say to YouTube Premium, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Every time I go on YouTube Premium, they ask me, do I want to sign up for YouTube Premium? And this is almost like every day, right? Even though I've said no, right? But an interesting example of trying to make this more personalized to myself. But
Hmm.
in as much as marketing. I think it all boils down to their marketing function. How are these
Yes.
products being marketed? And just looking at the marketing function, I feel like there's a fine line between personification and data privacy,
Yes.
right? Because in as much as, if you know as much as a lot of information about myself, obviously you will be able to offer me solutions, right? But it gets to a point where you've gone beyond trying to personalize it into my private information,
Yeah.
right? And just judging by your experience, I know you see it on the UK government or Parliament group task force, right? And you also, part of the, I think it's called RAD AI or RAID. I'm not
It's the AI and Ethics Journal.
AI.
Yeah, Rad AI is a private, separate company, but as you say, the All-Party Parliamentary Group and the AI and Ethics Journal.
Okay, so I know that this is one of the problems you're trying to solve. How do you solve this? What are your
Mm,
advice for kind of something of this
mm.
sort?
The start point is regulation. So think in Europe, and I know the UK is not part of Europe, but with GDPR, we do have a clause that we should be abiding by that talks about making sure transparent that we are transparent about our data. So it's really important that we abide as companies, as in by these regulations. It's quite early days, and so new regulations and guides and codes of conduct are important too. But as a company, we should be thinking about ideal ethical behavior is one that doesn't harm, doesn't contribute to harmful social structures, doesn't exploit people's data for for purposes, commercial purposes that they have oppressed them or that they haven't asked for, and so on. So um, there's that side of it. And like I said, with when we give our consent to a company like TGI Fridays or whoever it might be, then they know they can use our data, and then they need to do so ethically, going by their standards and so on. So I think it's really important. I think the way that we train the algorithms, AI is only as good as those programming it. So we need clean data, again, that isn't inherently biased to a certain gender or color, or and so on. So it's a very complex set of questions, but really, really important ones. And there are lots of institutes around the world, and political bodies and governments that are building their strategies to combat and to join together and to communicate all of these important things.
I think Europe might be the continent that is very strict about data privacy.
Yeah.
The only one that comes to it is not really a continent, it's a country, would be the US in California. They do have something quite similar, just in terms of the kind of the regulation, data privacy, just in terms of who accesses data and some of the things around it. So, which is very interesting.
Mm.
Would you agree that this is it a government issue, or is this meant to be an individual solving this issue, like organizations solving this issue?
All of them together. I think the data science community need to work with the business community and the trade bodies for, retail, banking, governments need to drive it. It's a real combined effort. And when I think about companies, and some, especially the tech companies, they've got away with a lot of things, and they're often ahead of the pack and driving the technology, and they're sometimes feel that they're beyond regulation, and that's so wrong. So I think they've got to set an example. They've got to collaborate openly for the benefit of everybody. And I was involved, going back to sort of 2018, and the House of Lords put up a really important code of conduct, with 5 key areas, that was about protecting individuals, protecting freedoms, protecting families, protecting business. And I think it's tricky because we've got different legal jurisdictions in all different countries, which makes, for example, the policing of social media so tricky. But this is so big, and so important, especially when you think about Ray Kurzweil and the singularity and the future of, like you said, Stephen Hawking saying, we've got to move to another planet because the robots are going to take over. It's so important, however this pans out in the future, that we are still able to take control, and the ethics and the balance of regulation and innovation are really important topics that we must join forces on globally and get right.
I agree. I actually agree with what you've said. And I think this brings me to another question about ethics. Often at times, ethics are often like an afterthought, just in terms of how, for example, you mentioned that a lot of tech companies do have AI models, AI algorithms and all that, but ethics is often after the models have been built. And a lot of companies could potentially face fines in the future, just in terms of the ethics around their AI model. How would you advise small enterprises or even mid-sized enterprises on how to bring ethics into the forefront?
Yeah, well, they need somebody on the board responsible for it. They need to consider the implications. They need to be very aware of the rules and regulations that exist. And if they don't exist, they should be playing their role in coming up with that code of conduct and setting an example and working in collaboration with their own trade body. So I don't think it's a good enough excuse to say it's not in place, because I think post COVID, when we think about reputation, when we think about purpose of organizations with regard to sustainability and other big issues, this is another one where companies need to be very responsible and to take initiatives and to work with, like I say, their business people, their tech people, their own ethics people. So, actually hiring an ethics advisor, working with government, working with trade bodies, looking at examples, for example, the All Party Parliamentary Group, the AI Council. There are collaborations with OECD countries around the world with guidelines. They mustn't ignore the great work that's already taking place there.
Yes. I want to put you in a tricky position, Katie. I want to make you uncomfortable a little bit.
Let's do it.
Right? So, if you were to think, just think, let's say maybe 5, 10 years into the future, what would you assume the adoption of AI would be for SMEs?
I think 5 years down the line, we won't be talking about the term AI nearly as much. I imagine it will get consumed into whether it's Microsoft or Google or a new player coming up, and it will be deployed quite readily because someone will have grasped and pulled all of the glue together that knits them. So inevitably there will be innovators and then there will be laggards. So SMEs don't typically have the same budget, but they are in a very competitive space, so they need to use it. So I think we'll see in 5 years much, much, much greater adoption, it being in the fabric of the company for their HR, for their comms, for their CX, but much less discussion about the tech and much more, this is how we do business. It's that next evolution.
It's an, just imagine, right? Would you think that in future that there will be a virtual AI assistant that will do all marketing task?
No, not all marketing tasks. I think that there could be think about Microsoft Office and think about PowerPoint, Excel, and all of that, that there'll be some kind of marketing suite that takes advantage of all this different technology that can do a lot of things for us, maybe draft content, do some research, generate some reports. So I think it would do a lot of those more monotonous routine report writing, drafting. And then our job will be to go in and execute those, to use that template, to use that draft copy. We'll still have to do it all, but we'll have chunks of it done for us. It will be easier, it will be more effective, more tailored. So I think it could be, as you kind of was probably touching on, across all areas of marketing, but we won't be redundant as a result of it. If we don't use the tools and technologies, we could get left behind and be redundant as individuals, but as a profession, marketeers won't be out of work. They will be more strategic. And that's brilliant because that will flatten hierarchies and make it easier for younger people who naturally use those tools to get on quicker.
Do you think, in terms of the regulations, do you presume that, or do you suggest that it would be tighter going on in the future?
It will be tighter, definitely. It needs to be tighter. Think of the issues that were happened a few years back with IBM and facial recognition, and some of the issues that still reign today. So yes, tighter, but we've got to balance innovation and regulation. So more guidelines, more international cooperation around guidelines and frameworks, and so on. In my book, I talk about a standardized framework, and in the second book, I talk about an Alethea framework from Rolls-Royce that's being given out to different industry bodies. So yeah, more cooperation, more regulation, but freer, greater use of it as well, which will make it evolve really in a really exciting way.
Brilliant. I love that. That was an interesting conversation, and we're coming to the end. And just for other people watching, you can always get a copy of the AI in Marketing book. Very interesting. It's on Amazon. And I know you do mention that on your website, but I'll let you do a bit of tell us how we can get the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a good place to go is definitely aiinbusiness.co.uk, because there you'll find, all my keynotes and the book, and I can provide through Talani a 20% discount code if people are interested. And I love to connect with people, so feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram. I'm there, and I'm very open to connecting with everyone. But aiinbusiness.co.uk, everything's easy for you to find by going to that first.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thanks for coming on IA Simplified. Interesting conversation, and I hope other people would enjoy it just the same way we've had a good time on this podcast. And for all the people watching, a full transcription will be available on my website, rpajargonbuster.com, in a few days. But remember, as always, RPA Jargon Buster is your go-to IA consultant. IA stands for Intelligent Automation Consultant for SME and Mid-Market Intelligent Automation Delivery and Deployment. If you do have questions for Katie, feel free to follow Katie on LinkedIn, and her handle is Katie King. She's also on Twitter as well. But even if you can't reach her, you can always reach out to me and I connect you to Katie. And until next time, stay informed.